Today, I promise, is the last installment of Fame and Shame, even though the topic has by no means been exhausted. That's for sure. The other day, someone asked, what is the difference between guilt and shame? And what about the guilt and shame that others put upon us rightfully and wrongfully? What do we do with that? How do we work with that? Well, let's start here. Guilt. Let me give you a working definition. Guilt arises when we feel bad about our behavior, about something we have done wrong, or something that has happened. Shame arises when we feel bad about who we are as a person, that we ourselves are defective. Guilt and shame can arise alone or together. Okay. Now, I was raised Catholic, and what I'm about to share is my experience. This is not a commentary on the Catholic teachings. So if there are any inaccuracies, I take full responsibility for them. But consider the potency of shame and guilt that we assume when it comes from powerful external authorities. Being raised Catholic from a very early age, I had an intimate relationship with guilt and shame that arose simply because of my faith, the faith that I was indoctrinated into at birth. Now, saying simply is perhaps misleading because our faiths, whatever they are, can and often do exert a powerful influence on the shaping of who we are and who we think we are, as well as who we think others are and who others think we are. From the Catholic teachings, as I understood it, as a human being, I was taught that I was fundamentally a sinner, and by comparison, less than to priests and nuns and saints. As a girl, I was seen as either a whore or a Madonna, and for sure, always a temptress. I was taught to be ashamed of my body. I was taught that it was dirty, which really meant that all of my attempts to be a good girl, to be faithful to my faith, were ultimately doomed. I felt the weight of this unworthiness just because I existed. I felt not good enough at the starting gate. I would never really be good enough. Well, these were the messages from the elders of my spiritual tradition. They were bigger than me. They were older than me, had more experience than me. They had God on their side. Surely they knew more. How could I question them? But I did. And their answers didn't satisfy me. I was still confused. The facts didn't add up. No one ever really answered my questions. Their logic was based on the miracle of God, and I was expected to believe. Questioning cast a shadow on my character. Well, that's a bind. It leaves believing as the only option. And believing meant believing that I was unworthy, a sinner, someone who could never get out from under the flaw of humanity or from being a descendant of Eve. And that strangely felt antithetical to the Christian teachings, as antithetical as being told at the ripe age of 22 that I was going to hell for having premarital sex. Yes, confession was not a liberating experience for me. It sadly left me more burdened with shame and guilt and confusion. Confusion because it caused by the inner conflict between the part of me that felt like, hey, I'm fine, I'm just a kid, and the other part of me that partially believed what I was being told, that I was fundamentally bad. You're told that enough times and you kind of believe it. My mind would try to reason, right? And so I'd look back over the course of the day, and of course, I could see all of the little things that went wrong, all the little things that I did that I felt bad about, like talking back to my mother, or swearing, or hiding my father's cigarettes so he'd stop smoking, or lying to my parents when I was out with my friends, right? You see how easy it is to begin to rattle these things off? That was proof that I was a bad girl, a sinner, marked from the start. What was wrong with me? How can I deny the evidence of my rogueness? They were right there. I was bad, and I didn't want to admit it. Well, I carried that shame with me as a woman, as a young woman, for most of my young adult life. I carried the shame of being a woman and of being a sexual being until I began practicing the teachings of the Buddha, the teachings on what he called the middle way. And I'm using that expression today. Laura used it the other day as well. But I'm using that expression today because it clearly states a position, the middle between extremes, which sounds simple, but is actually really hard to do and hard to stabilize. Well, as a result of this deeply ingrained habit, guilt is probably the first emotion that still flashes before me when something goes wrong. Still. But these days, I notice the impulse, and then I can steer out of it. I notice the impulse and I don't judge it. Now, I can do this because of the practice, specifically mindfulness meditation practices that have taught me how to step back and how to step out of that impulse. In other words, how to move a little bit more out of that extreme position, out of that stuck position of feeling bad, and move a little more to the middleness. The middle way is the way of equanimity, the ability to stand present to whatever is happening without getting pulled off center, the ability to look at what is happening, whether it's pleasant or unpleasant, with an equal amount of care and consideration. Equal caring attention to what is here, whether fame or shame or guilt. This posture takes time, takes practice to entrain. Suspending judgment, looking at how I feel or what is happening with kind eyes, letting go of the tension that accumulates in my body because of these unbidden emotions. Oh, it takes time. It takes patience, a willingness and a commitment to keep letting go of that train of thought, like letting it go, just letting it go, and coming back and rebuilding the holding environment, coming back and setting up a mindful view, beginning again, feeling back into these bodies and encouraging this attitude of non-judgmental caring attention. We are in training. Every time we do that, we are in training tolerance and acceptance and patience, all of which are ingredients that lead to equanimity. So what about the shame and the guilt that others put on us rightfully and wrongfully? How do we work with that? Well, I'd say that many of us wrongfully accuse ourselves and others all the time of all kinds of things. Notice. That's in capital letters, each one. Notice. Notice those thoughts. Interrupt the habit, not once, but many times. As many times as you can remember, interrupt that habit. Notice when the mind wanders into these kinds of stories and beliefs about who you are or who you think someone else is. See it. There it is. Now take a breath. Withdraw attention from that habitual line of thinking and bring the attention back in here. Tether the breath to the body to the ground. Now keep attention in the body and kindly watch over as the tangle of sensations related to that line of thinking untangle. They will, of their own accord. We just have to give them space and time. And this is the practice of returning again and again to the present moment, which when we do that, every time we do that, we set up the conditions necessary for clear seeing and for discernment. For clear seeing and discernment to happen, we have to settle ourselves enough so that we can see and feel a little bit more clearly what's happening. Out of this and over time, what comes into view is a view that is very different than little old Susan Morgan. She gets caught up in things personally. She identifies and takes things personally. But mindfulness entrains the vision and wisdom of a wise elder. who sees and listens and responds, not out of judgment, but with interest and understanding and care that is aimed at goodwill and non-harm. Now I can learn in that kind of atmosphere. In that kind of atmosphere, I'm not defective. In that kind of atmosphere, it's all right for me to be perfectly imperfect, just as I am, no problem. This is what we're trying to do in practice. We're entraining this posture. So let's keep practicing the middle way. Let's not get caught up in the stories of fame or shame. Let's try to see them wisely and kindly, let go and come back inside into the present moment, into these bodies, breathing, and begin again with kind eyes. All right. Thank you for your kind attention.